When I first heard about the Duotts F26 electric bike, I immediately thought it might surprise me with something completely different from anything I'd ridden before. And I wasn't wrong. Two motors of 750 watts each, 26-inch wheels with thick 4-inch tires, a battery cleverly hidden in the frame, and an overall fat bike look. All of this made a very positive impression on me after several rides in various conditions. In today's video, I'll show you how the assembly of this bike went, what amazed me, what I would change, and of course I'll share my riding impressions. Along the way, I'll compare it with the Duotts C29, which I tested previously. I want to note right away that I received this bike directly from the manufacturer for review, but they gave me complete freedom in creating the content. Thanks for all your support for my blog and channel. Assembly and first impressions. Duotts F26 is another e-bike from China that ended up in my hands, and I have to admit the package is quite large. The courier had to help me carry it in, which is not surprising. With accessories, the bike weighs almost 40 kilograms. For comparison, the C29 from the same manufacturer weighs about 27 kilograms. As is the case with most Chinese e-bikes, the assembly is kept as simple as possible. The bike arrives practically assembled, so there's not much gymnastics required. From opening the box to hitting the road, it took me around 15 minutes. If you want to see how it looks step by step, there's a separate video about the assembly in the description of the film. In principle, the assembly itself is limited to putting on the front wheel, tightening the handlebars, attaching the display, mounting the rear rack and fender, attaching the pedals, installing the saddle, and plugging in some cables on a color-to-color basis. By default, the F26 comes with standard grips, but the set also includes a modified throttle grip with a pure electric mode feature. In other words, if you want, you can install the throttle and cruise control right away. However, I have a small note here. I really struggled to remove the factory-mounted grip. It was on so tightly that it took a 30-minute session with a hairdryer and careful prying with wooden tools to get it off. Initially, I wanted to move the brake lever to get better access, but just like in the C29, the screws are tightened so hard that I couldn't budge them. I mentioned this in the video about replacing the brakes with hydraulic ones. Link in the description. I also had to adjust the front hydraulic brake calipers. They were mounted slightly at an angle, causing rubbing against the disc. And you won't guess this, none of the wrenches in the set could loosen the mounting screws, so I had to use a power screwdriver to loosen them. In the end, I managed to adjust the brakes quite easily and quickly, but it's worth using your own tools rather than those provided in the kit. First impressions. Duotts F26 immediately catches the eye with its design. A large number of electric bikes stand out on the road with a big battery on the frame and a controller mounted somewhere on the side. This takes up a lot of space, so most often such a bike comes with a rear rack right away, so you can at least carry a water bottle. In the case of the F26, it's much better, although not yet perfect. This electric bike has an interesting shape, a solid, massive frame. And in its lower part, the manufacturer hid the battery. This element fits flush with the frame, so nothing really sticks out or draws attention. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough space to hide the controller as well, so we have an additional box at the back of the frame. The F26 model is available in two paint options. The first is silver black, and I'm testing the black-red version. I have to admit that I really like this paint job. The colors are matte, and the red contrasts nicely. It makes the bike look solid and somewhat sporty. Duotts F26 comes in one frame size. According to the manufacturer, it should fit people from 170 to 200 centimeters tall. At my height of 182 centimeters, I feel very comfortable on it. The riding position is comfortable, and when you sit on the bike, you almost have the feeling of being on a cruiser-style motorcycle. The top part of the frame is slightly narrower, but you can see a thicker segment of the lower frame underneath it where the battery goes. Visually, the structure widens toward the bottom. I happen to like that. My wife, who is slightly shorter than me, also tested the bike. This is where another aspect comes up. The F26 has 26-inch tires, but they're quite wide and thick, 4 inches. As a result, the entire frame is slightly higher than, for instance, in the C29 model. Some people like to get off the saddle after stopping, for example, when waiting for the light to change. Here, especially for smaller riders, you'll have to tilt the bike because the frame might be too close to the crotch. At my height, I can comfortably sit on the frame with my legs nearly straight. Bike weight. The F26 weighs nearly 40 kilograms. compared to the C29, about 27 kilograms. That's a big difference, but with two motors and such a large battery, it's no surprise. If you store it, for example, on an upper floor in an apartment building, carrying it upstairs might be a challenge. In addition to the two motors and the substantial battery, the wide tires also add weight. There's not much you can slim down here, maybe aside from removing the fenders or rack, which wouldn't change much anyway. On the other hand, this weight, together with those thick tires, makes the bike very stable off-road. I've ridden on asphalt, concrete, mud, gravel, in the forest, and on rocky sections, and I always felt secure. The only downside is the simple front suspension. For aggressive off-road riding, it might be too weak to absorb all the shocks and protect your wrists. However, for normal use, it's just fine. Brakes in the F26. If you remember my review of the Duotts C29, one of the cheapest electric bikes on the market, you'll recall that my biggest complaint was about its very poor mechanical brakes. In the case of the F26, we already have dedicated hydraulic brakes branded with the Duotts logo. The calipers are also painted red, which matches the overall look of the bike nicely. The rear brakes were well set up from the factory, but as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I had to adjust the front ones so they wouldn't rub. And I must say that after adjustment, they work superbly. The bike just brakes great, and I have nothing to complain about. I'll just add that the brake levers also have an additional adjustment feature. Accessories in the F26. The manufacturer includes a pump, reflectors, a set of wrenches, a charger, as well as a phone and document pouch, exactly the same as with other Duotts models. The saddle is again quite thick and large. It does a great job absorbing bumps during the ride and doesn't cause fatigue even after a longer journey. I really like the front LED lamp. It has a lens that clearly cuts off the beam at the top and shines quite brightly. The rear lamp also has a built-in brake light function, which is a great solution, especially in the city. It's mounted in the standard way on the rack frame. Pedal assist and motor in the F26. Duotts F26 is equipped with two motors, each rated at 750 watts. As I mentioned earlier, you can use just one, the rear, and if you need extra power, simply press the DS button on the left side of the handlebar to activate the front one and get all-wheel drive. It's a simple solution, but it produces an incredible effect, especially when you need to climb a steep hill or just want to feel that extra kick. The problem is that at first glance it's hard to tell if the button is activated. There's no information on the display, no backlight, nothing. The bike also has a modernized display that works smoothly and lets you set the pedal assist in 5 levels, 0 to 5. Similar to the C29 model, each pass level corresponds to a certain maximum speed. With one difference, if the F26 is locked to 25 km per hour, these ranges are better calibrated, meaning there's no such abrupt acceleration in the lower gears, making it much more pleasant to ride without going wild. Another advantage is the fully independent throttle. Even if you're riding at a low assist level, for an example up to 10 km per hour, you can twist the throttle at any time and accelerate up to 25 km per hour without changing the pass level. I really like that, and on a daily basis I ride this bike with the speed locked at 25 km per hour. Of course, the speed limit can be removed, in exactly the same way as in the C29. I showed everything in a separate video, link in the description. However, once you do it, the bike turns into a real demon. Seriously, that's not just a figure of speech. The kick is incredible, almost absurd for an electric bike. The huge power of two motors combined with the lack of a limit means that I got the F26 up to 60 km per hour, which is really impressive at this weight, around 40 kilograms. I do have a small note here. On the Passy bike I used previously, raising the speed limit was distributed smoothly across the gears, so you could set, say, 35 km per hour as the top speed. In the F26, just like in the C29, it's a binary solution, either 25 km per hour or full power with no half measures. Once unlocked, you can hit about 20 km per hour on the first assist level, which can sometimes be overkill in certain situations. I experienced this when I wanted to keep pace with a friend on a road bike who was riding at a constant speed of about 33 km per hour. The locked kilometers per hour was too slow, and after unlocking, the F26 immediately surged ahead and encouraged speeds of 40 to 50 km per hour. It was hard to find a sweet spot. In the end, instead of pedaling, I kept the speed with the throttle, which somewhat defeated the purpose. However, if you ride with someone who also has an electric bike, you can have a blast together because the two motors of the F26 provide an almost absurd amount of acceleration, and the large wheels aren't bothered by the terrain at all. I noticed earlier that the throttle on the C29 worked somewhat unpredictably. Sometimes it would surge, sometimes it would barely move, which was quite irritating because it was completely unpredictable. In the F26, starting with the throttle is always calm and balanced, which I like. However, under pedal assist, especially with the speed limit removed, you can experience truly wild acceleration. In my tests, going slightly uphill, I managed to reach 60 km per hour, which felt absolutely insane. What's more, the gear ratios are well chosen, so you can still pedal without spinning in the air. The manufacturer claims that the bike can handle even a 50-degree incline, and I have to admit that I managed to climb slopes that usually required a lot of leg power on the C29 or Passy bike, and on the F26 it just kept on accelerating. Such high power can be downright addictive. Everyone I let ride it in unlocked mode had a huge smile on their face. I also would prefer to have the option of setting a more precise upper speed limit. In most cases, 25 km per hour is simply too slow because a typical cyclist goes faster than that, while unlocking it transforms the bike into a drag racer, which isn't always necessary. The F26's controller is definitely better than the one in the C29, though I feel like it sometimes thinks for itself and doesn't always give full throttle under the same conditions. However, as soon as you start pedaling, you immediately get a huge burst of energy, proving that the second motor is still at your disposal. Recently, Duotts released a new model, the E26, in which they supposedly used their best solutions, and it's now their flagship. Who knows, maybe that's the bike I'll test next. Legality of the bike. Regulations governing electric bicycles in Europe may appear straightforward at first glance. For an e-bike to be classified as a regular bicycle and thus allowed on public roads and bike paths without special registration, it must have a nominal motor power of no more than 250 watts, provide assistance only while pedaling, and stay under 25 km per hour. In reality, however, many models labeled as 250 watts can deliver peak outputs of 1000 watts or even more, largely depending on battery and controller settings. This discrepancy stems in part from manufacturers aiming to meet legal import thresholds. Meanwhile, 250 watts is considered fairly low in e-bike terms, especially since a trained cyclist alone can produce well over 400 watts by pedaling. As a result, many brands deliberately understate the nominal power of their motors, while equipping them with 36-volt batteries and controllers rated at 15 amperes or 20 amperes. Such configurations can easily push actual peak output to 540 watts, 700 watts or more. If a bike has a throttle or a motor exceeding this nominal limit, as is the case with the F26, which features two 750 watts motors, EU regulations do not classify it as a standard bicycle, even if you lock its speed to 25 km per hour. In theory, it should undergo homologation and be registered as a moped or another type of motor vehicle. Whether these rules make sense is up for debate, but it's always wise to ride responsibly and avoid endangering yourself or others. If you plan to use the full potential of a high-power e-bike, it's better to do so away from public roads. When you do head out where formal regulations apply, remember to wear a helmet and be considerate of others. Personally, I've been riding powerful e-bikes for over a year without issues, but I make sure I don't inconvenience anyone. In practice, you can see that it's not purely about legality, but rather about regulations that manufacturers often circumvent. Scooters, for instance, technically aren't supposed to ride on sidewalks, yet plenty of them do, and many can go faster than a standard e-bike. So as you can see, it's not solely a matter of legality or nonsensical rules. It's also the reality that these same rules are commonly sidestepped in practice. What I liked. When I first saw the Duotts F26, I was genuinely impressed by how carefully it was made. No crooked welds, no paint flaws, and no cheap materials that you sometimes find in these types of constructions. It's clear that the manufacturer made an effort to pay attention to detail. Even the saddle mount isn't just any old clamp. I really like that the battery was cleverly hidden in the frame. In many e-bikes, you see a big battery sticking out, which is the cheapest construction solution. But here, it doesn't spoil the bike's silhouette because it lines up nicely with the frame. The method of removing the battery is also cleverly thought out, as the manufacturer added an additional locking mechanism to prevent the battery from falling out when the key is accidentally turned. The riding position is another big plus. I could ride quite a few kilometers without any wrist or back problems. And those fat tires offer unbelievable stability, especially when you leave the asphalt and head onto forest paths or gravel roads. You don't get the feeling that the bike is slipping or losing traction. It handles itself confidently overall, and the two motors can provide such a kick that inclines stop being a challenge altogether. I also appreciate that the brakes are hydraulic from the get-go, unlike in the Duotts C29, where the basic version unfortunately came with very weak mechanical brakes. Here you don't need to swap anything out because the bike responds well to every squeeze of the brake lever. As a bonus, there's the front lamp with a lens and a clearly defined light cutoff. It's hands down one of the best stock headlights I've seen on an e-bike. It's also worth mentioning that the F26 provides a really enjoyable ride. The pass levels are finally well calibrated, so you can pedal casually rather than just riding on power. Big plus for the throttle being completely independent of the selected assist level, allowing you to boost your speed at any moment if needed. What I didn't like. Definitely a downside is the F26's weight. Almost 40 kilograms makes a difference, especially if you have to carry the bike upstairs. At my height and with reasonably good fitness, it's manageable, but I know not everyone wants to lift that kind of weight every day. This mass mainly comes from the dual drive system, wide tires and large battery, so it can't be easily reduced. It's a trade-off, but it's still heavy, no denying it. It's also a bit of a shame that the controller, instead of being hidden in the frame, ended up in a little box near the rear section of the bike. It's not a deal breaker for the F26, but in the C29, the manufacturer managed to hide the electronics. Most irritating, however, is the fact that the display gives no indication of whether you're using one or two motors. Sure, there's that small DS button on the handlebar, but there's practically no visual confirmation, so sometimes you'll ride and wonder if you're on both motors or just the rear. While the assist is very subtle with the speed locked, which I actually really like, unlocking the bike removes all limitations and things get crazy. I'd like to have more control over that split and be able to set the limit myself, for example, raising it from 25 to 30 km per hour, etc. As it stands, you're either too slow and lagging behind or charging forward like crazy. It's all very binary, and I hope that in future models, like the announced E26, they'll have a more refined controller with more configuration options. I also noticed that shorter people like my wife, even though they really enjoyed this bike, had to develop a special technique for mounting and dismounting the F26. The thick tires raise the frame, which can be problematic, and it's similar when you try to make a tight turn with the bike. It feels more like maneuvering a car on a narrow road. Summary. Duotts F26 is a great choice for those who want something more an electric bike than just a little help during leisurely rides. Thanks to the two motors with a total power of 1,500 watts and really wide tires, this machine is suitable for daily commutes as well as more challenging terrain. Steep climbs or muddy paths aren't an issue. Its design stands out for its solid construction, and the battery hidden in the frame gives it an appealing look. As for the riding experience, it primarily offers confident handling and a powerful kick in reserve, which can be addictive if you remove the factory speed limiter. Of course, certain compromises are inevitable. A weight nearing 40 kilograms means carrying it upstairs won't be easy for everyone. Some users might also consider the lack of more flexible maximum speed settings a drawback. In the F26, it's either 25 km per hour or full power. On the other hand, this binary setup may appeal to those who value simplicity and love feeling the power of two motors without fiddling with various settings. Despite these reservations, the F26 is one of the more interesting fat bike e-bikes on the market. It's stable in varied terrain, and the factory-installed hydraulic brakes and carefully matched components don't require any immediate modifications. Plus, the manufacturer paid attention to nice details, like well-calibrated pass settings and a very good front lamp, and it just plain looks great. So, if you're looking for an electric bike that lets you ride at a lock speed in everyday traffic, while also giving you the option to unleash a considerable amount of power when you need it, for example on weekend trips off-road, the Duotts F26 might just hit the bullseye. Just be prepared for its weight and fairly large riding dynamics. It's definitely not a typical city e-bike. Ultimately, if I had to choose one bike for myself, I'd lean toward the F26 rather than the C29, because it's higher quality, looks better, and offers more possibilities. It's worth paying extra for it. Finally, I have some good news for those interested in purchasing. The manufacturer has prepared special discount codes that you can use when ordering from their official website. You'll find all the details in the video description. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next videos.